So I appreciate everybody for coming. Happy New Year's. Hopefully this year will turn out to be a lot better, and we'll get not off to the greatest start yet, but we'll see what happens. So I appreciate everybody for coming. Um, Real quickly, we a month ago we were really optimistic about actually being able to do B sides in person this year. Um, we're probably moving back to the fence considering the vaccine rollout is more like I would say, Operation instead of Operation Warp Speed, it's was it Operation Impulse Power? So it's just crawling along, unfortunately. So we thought you'd be able to target like a late July, maybe August timeframe. I don't know if that's reasonable at this point to be able to meet, even if we did require everybody to have vaccine cards. So kind of stand by, and we'll kind of see what evolves over the next month or so. So I was starting to get excited about being able to meet in person again, but the way things are going right now, that just might not be possible. Or maybe we shoot for like November, December. That might give us our better shot if we want to try to do it this year. But then, of course, we run into weather issues. So but just to throw that out there, I think we got most of the bags out to everybody in the greater Greenville area. I think there's a small stack that my daughter still hasn't delivered. So I need to kind of reinforce force that with her. So other than that, I think that kind of covers out the announcements. Next month we'll have the gentleman that's he operates kind of as the CISO/CIO for the Greenville school districts, talking mostly about their program based off of the ISO standards. 27,001, 27,002. They actually went, I believe, and actually got certified. So he'll be talking about that next month, and then we'll get a couple other exciting talks after that. So as far as today, so I appreciate to Kelly, who we've worked with for probably the better part of 10 years at this point over at TekSystems. And she and TekSystems have been a great supporter of the chapter. We really appreciate all of her help, not only the chapter, but B-Sides as well. So you might have seen her at B-Sides as well. And she brought Logan and Michael along with her as well to talk about really the state of the market, hiring in cybersecurity, and really where we could just kind of throw out any of the questions that we're curious about asking on the state of the cybersecurity hiring place these days. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you guys. Thanks again.
Cool.
Let me,
Yeah,
Kelly, I'll go ahead and
Mike.
make you the host so you can share your screen.
Okay. Oh, yep, that should work. Awesome. Cool. All right, can y'all see that? Thank you, Mike, for that on. But yeah, thanks for having us here. I know it's the first one of the year, so glad to be able to kick it off with you guys. Just for some quick introductions, like Mike said, I've been with Tech only 5 years, but I've supported the Upstate on the infrastructure and security side of things for the majority of that time. I did get around to officially changing my name last year. So Kelly Saxby, Kelly Belding, we're the same person. And I've got Logan on, like Mike mentioned. She's also an account manager here in the Upstate. And then Mike, he's a recruiter that specializes in infrastructure and risk and security. He sits in our Charleston office, but supports the state of South Carolina as well as other customers we have across the country as well. So like Mike mentioned as well, we're kind of talking through a few things around just the current market, specific to information security, some trends we're seeing in hiring, the impacts that last year has had on those specifically, and then just some basic interview and resume tips. And then there's a section in there too about kind of how to market yourself and things you can do to get in the to get into security or to stand out. So that's kind of what we'll be going through, and then there'll definitely be time for questions at the end. Or if you want to kind of pipe up throughout, that's totally fine too. So cool. So the current landscape, kind of what we're looking at when someone says, what does the current market look like, or the current landscape? What we like to look at is, what are companies still hiring? What are they hiring for? And what does that look like compared to the amount of candidates and quality talent in that skill set out there? So this was taken actually in the last year. So we partner with a couple of different organizations when it comes to market data. And so you can see kind of nationally versus here up in the upstate, there is still a huge demand for security skill sets. And you can see, I wanted to add in, because I think when y'all know better than I do, when someone says information security, that can mean a whole gamut of things. So those are actually the top job titles that are out there that people are looking for. And this is a snapshot of the last year, which I think is really indicative of how important information security is to businesses and organizations. So give it a minute there. I've got an infographic on the next slide that kind of shows it more. So I think there's been a misconception out there that a lot of people have been laid off and stuff like that. And while unemployment has definitely gone up within IT and IT security specifically, it has remained pretty low from an unemployment perspective. So still pretty similar market conditions, even though the economic impacts in 2020 have hit other groups pretty heavily. So, and this, like I said, just kind of shows, on the left is the upstate of South Carolina, and on the right is national. So definitely there are a lot more job postings than there are active candidates, and that's stayed pretty steady. But just kind of over the last 2 years, the ups and downs of the market. So it looked like things did drop off a little bit towards the end of last year. So curious to see how that will go into 2021. But there's definitely still a demand out there. So, and you can see too, I know a big challenge is lack of top talent, specifically within cybersecurity. And unfortunately, that hasn't hit any big spikes recently. So there's still definitely room out there to get into that field. So I can stop there for a second if anybody has any questions around that. Cool. So I think something, as I was going through data for all this, that I thought would be good to kind of put out there was industries that are really focusing on information security professionals. So here in the upstate, there's a big focus obviously on big healthcare organizations in the area. Financial is big. I know there's a lot of different types of financial organizations here in our market. And then those two definitely, and then higher ed and automotive. I know there's a lot of schools here that do hire a lot of, that have big information security groups. So just thought that was interesting as people are looking at opportunities and what Greenville has to offer. And I'll go into the next slide a little bit. It is important to touch on that nationally because there are a lot more opportunities to work remotely nowadays. So wanted to include the industries here that on a national level are hiring the majority of the professionals within information security. So some of them are pretty obvious, but just thought that the differences were interesting as well with the automotive and higher ed here in the upstate, which makes sense. So cool. And then just overall in hiring, I know I have presented something similar at B-Sides a couple years back, and some of these trends are the same and are continuing to become more prevalent. But just hiring in general, a lot of companies are utilizing online applicant tracking systems, and that along with that comes a lot of automation in regards to when you submit your resume, algorithms that have key buzzwords, and some hiring managers or HR departments don't end up actually seeing resumes. So that's definitely something when it comes to hiring that is becoming more and more prevalent. They're taking the human aspect out of it. just like in a lot of other things. In addition, hiring is seeing that as well. So I think that's just something that's important to understand about hiring in general and what that looks like. And then in conjunction with that, VMS systems, vendor management systems, there are a lot of vendors out there. There's a lot of way you can bring on talent and hire people. And there's a lot of companies to partner with in that regard. So large organizations are really putting an emphasis on streamlining that process and consolidating that process. So it's easier for hiring managers. There's pros and cons to those, but that's definitely something that we're seeing more and more. Larger companies are implementing, whether it be a tool or a managed service provider, to come in and kind of help consolidate all of that. It's definitely important to understand kind of spend, and there's companies and tools out there that can help you do that when it comes to hiring, but that does impact the market too. And then of course, definitely want to talk about how COVID has impacted hiring and what that will look like. So like I mentioned earlier, there is overall an increase in candidates due to layoffs. From an IT perspective and information security, thankfully hasn't been impacted as much because it's certainly essential to businesses, but certain groups like project managers, BAs within the IT space have been impacted. So it just looks a little bit different now. But I think more so what's important to this group here is just the increase in remote capabilities, and I guess how that impacts the group. No one really knows exactly what the long-term outlook is going to be. And just in talking with people, there are definitely an increase in remote roles right now, but we don't know if that's going to continue to stay around, what businesses are thinking long term. It definitely varies depending on the company that you're talking to and what's important. But I think just from a pay perspective, it'll have some interesting ramifications. So just us being here from a smaller market, where cost of living is a little bit lower, we now have access to roles in Charlotte, Atlanta, California, in which the salaries match more so that cost of living. So it could be super beneficial for someone here to target an opportunity based in one of those markets. Whereas on the flip side of that, if you are in one of those markets, you have the same exact experience as someone coming from a smaller town with lower cost of living. Therefore they're asking for a lower salary, then unfortunately that might impact you negatively. So I think we might start to see the salary gaps in different markets kind of level off. So I think that'll be something interesting that will come about the remote piece. But, and then too, especially if you are an organization that is looking to hire, that's definitely something you want to consider in getting top talent is, hey, if you know that this person's going to need to be on site, that might eliminate a lot of the talent pool, because there are opportunities out there, because there are still more job postings than there are security professionals. So those professionals, if they really want something remote, can certainly find that. So something to definitely keep in mind, and what some of the impacts that we've seen throughout the past year. So like I said, that's kind of what that means for candidates as well as organizations that are looking to hire. And then I think for the automation and the vendor management systems, what that means is just making sure you're really reading through job descriptions and job postings, making sure your resume is tailored for those specifically. And Mike will touch on that a little bit later. But that just makes it increasingly more important to really focus on those buzzwords, as well as networking and utilizing your network, so that just to kind of bolster the chances of getting through those systems. And even if there's someone that you know at a company that isn't in IT or in security, it's definitely so good to network and understand how you can kind of make yourself stand out in those systems that kind of are making things more standardized. So I think that was all there. If anybody had any questions on that section. Yeah, that was a lot.
I probably had had a few. I don't know. Some of these are going to get covered in other sections, but and I know you had LinkedIn on one of the slides as a way for marketing, especially more important these days. But I do get a lot of people asking how important LinkedIn is in the job search process. I think a lot of people, especially a lot of the students and some of the established professionals, probably some of the more of us that have been around a while, might not see maybe the use or the need for that. But I always consider it very important. But how, I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe how important do you think it would be to make sure you have a LinkedIn profile?
I definitely think it's upwards the 9 and 10 area. A lot of times if we're working with hiring managers, they'll ask for their LinkedIn profile, because a lot of people kind of want to see what else you're interested in, what else you're doing outside of your job, which is a lot of times not necessarily listed on a resume. And then connections to like the networking piece, like if you get an applicant, hey, maybe they worked at this company, maybe this person knows them, go to LinkedIn and see and utilize it in that way. And then most companies do leverage LinkedIn for their internal recruiting tool. That's one of the main ones across the board. That companies prioritize as one of their recruiting tools. So if you're not on there, I would definitely highly, highly recommend getting on there. So, and I think there was one of these meetings where maybe somebody went over kind of how to optimize your LinkedIn profile. I thought that was
it was the one Ben did
cool
for us. That was probably what, Ben, 2 years ago, year and a half. No, I think we were actually at the floor management center. So it was probably about 2 years. That was a great presentation. I wish we had taped that for all my students. They could definitely.
I think it's definitely still relevant today. So.
Okay, I just wanted everybody to hear from the professionals.
So Kelly, I have a question for you. You put down here targeted and tailored resumes and buzzwords. Do you have 2 resources that you would suggest to the group for that kind of thing? I mean, you look at things like Wikipedia as a general knowledge base, but do you have any specific tools that you use for those?
Yep. And I would say, I think that what that point is kind of going towards is tailoring it to the job that you are applying for. Because a lot of those, so hey, TekSystems has a job posting up. We have an algorithm in place that if you don't have a percentage of the words in your resume that are on our job description, you're going to get automatically booted out. So I think it's making sure that your resume matches up, obviously accurately, and represents your experience honestly. But you want to make sure if they use server, you use system, you're updating your resume to say that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
That's good to know. I never even thought about systems that could automatically parse through and look for certain buzzwords. So that's definitely a good to have. Another thing we've been talking about at the office since coming back from vacation, so we're doing our annual salary planning activities right now. And what it looked like was over the last year that salaries have basically stayed the same. And after seeing an increase fairly well over the last couple of years, and some of it obviously, and maybe most of it's due to COVID, but then we had always prior to COVID also had talked about really salaries in IT security leveling off as more and more people come into the field. So is there any idea whether that's a factor or not, or is it primarily just due to COVID, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I, in talking with Logan and Mike, I definitely wanted to include salary information, because when someone talks about the market, that's definitely, hey, am I making what I should be compared to the market? But it was hard to really narrow it down, because there are so many varied skill sets within security. The range was not accurate because it was just too big. But if specifically you want us to get some information in your realm, I can definitely do that for you. I did want to mention that. But to answer your question, I do think just from a raise, a lot of companies are having to really look at spend and stuff like that, and raises and salary are something that is going first. So I do think it somewhat does have to do with the economic impacts of COVID, but because I don't think that the demand is leveling off within information security. I think it's definitely still super high demand.
Okay. And I guess that kind of leads into one of the other questions I had in the back of my mind was if there's been an uptick since the SolarWinds breach was announced, now that it's been a month, I guess, basically, since that, if that stirred any of the other, especially maybe the upstate companies to look for folks, or if that really just hasn't had an impact and we're probably at kind of breach fatigue already in hiring.
Yeah, we saw some immediate, like conversations around immediate support just to help come in and rectify the situation. I am so curious to see the long term, to your point. I think most organizations had people in place to help remediate, but if companies did not have that in place, I think it's definitely becoming apparent that they need to. So I think that will, this year, kind of put an influx in hiring.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So Kelly, this is George.
Oh, yep.
Sorry,
hey, George.
I just had an interesting question. So I know you did show some of the different hiring areas, but where's the hotspot right now for security hiring? Like, is there a certain market sector that's more on fire, like maybe medical, but I don't know, right?
Yeah, I think, and Logan will go into this a little bit here, so I don't want to steal your thunder, Logan, but I think a lot of things are going towards cloud security, and that's definitely what a lot of organizations are needing and the business is dictating. I think within each specific industry, to your point, like the healthcare has different security needs, et cetera. But I think overarchingly cloud security is something that the businesses are needing and we're seeing more and more of lately. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Great, that leads us kind of into making yourself marketable within the industry. So it's obviously important to make yourself marketable, especially when we have, lots of talent out there looking for similar roles. So very helpful to do so. Some of the statistics around certification specifically, 96% of IT leaders believe that team members with cybersecurity certifications add value to their organization. Over half of IT leaders believe that cybersecurity certifications have helped to close skill gaps within their teams. And then, 46% of leaders believe that when people have these certifications, it boosts their productivity. So on this list, this is referencing 2020, some of the top and most valuable certifications specifically to security. I think it's important to note here, roughly, 2 years ago, we weren't really seeing some of these cloud technology certs being as important and valuable, similar to what Kelly was just noting there. It's definitely a trend that we're seeing as people are moving to the cloud, and just overall reflects the growing industry concentration for cloud, and everything that goes along with that. And then we've also listed, here specifically in the upstate, these are schools that are producing the top security talent right now. So definitely important to highlight these on your resume to help you stand out against others in the industry.
Well, we took number 2. I'll take that then. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I thought about that when I saw that. So cool. Did anybody have any questions around that? That was a little bit shorter. And just to add to, it's definitely good to highlight the schools, but if you were looking to get into, and I don't know from an audience population who fits into this, but if cybersecurity is something that you were looking to get into, that was kind of why I wanted to add that there. From a program perspective, those are the organization or the higher ed institutions that are well known here in the upstate for getting you prepared.
No, Kelly, this is George again. This is great. I'm actually a certified software tester, and I'm looking to broaden my horizon by getting into security. So this is great.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Is there any idea where on the list of certifications where the CompTIA Pen Test Plus might rank, and if there's a where that might stand? I see it as these days a much more valid alternative than the CEH.
Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that, and I'm not sure exactly looking at this list.
But Mike, isn't everything more valid than the CEH?
Well, that's kind of, I think, that we normally say in the, I think those of us that have the kind of the real world practitioners would say that would be true, but maybe, you know, from it, maybe like the HR hiring perspective, not necessarily, and that they still see the CEH as the pen test certification of choice. But I've heard, you know, over the last probably, I think this even goes back before COVID, that a lot of people were switching over to Pen Test Plus because it was from CompTIA. You know, it's a little bit more seen as vendor neutral. It's up to date, right? Versus, you know, the CEH has this, I guess it's renowned to be fairly outdated and in the content and the tools that it tests on. But I thought I would ask. I don't know if you have a master list of top 100 most valuable certifications to see where it is, but or if that comes up in conversations, because that is the one that we have been steering, especially students to, rather than and plus it's nicer because it's like a third of the cost as well.
Yeah, and something that brings up that I meant to mention is, as you're looking to go into quote unquote security, it is important to kind of pick a track. And I think a lot of people, and like I said, y'all know about this just as much as I do, think information security sometimes is what you see in the movies, people hacking and red team, blue team, et cetera. But a lot of what the business needs, and I think this certification list reflects that, is someone coming in from like a compliance and a risk perspective, making sure controls are in place, et cetera, is something that in the real world is necessary versus what you typically see in regards to the movies and TV shows. So that was just something that I did want to note there.
Sure, that makes sense.
Well, cool. Well, yeah, I'm not sure how many of y'all are interviewing remotely or anything, but Mike will touch on just some tips there, and so I'll pass it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, interviewing remotely offers a whole new set of roadblocks, really. This is just the standard interview prep that we like to provide. When you get asked about tell me about yourself, definitely do your research before you're going into that interview. Connect with anybody you might know. That's LinkedIn can become a really good resource for that. Also, going through industry trends on Google. I know that LinkedIn Premium, I think, has some really good insights on that as well. But going through your most recent experience first when you get asked that tell me about yourself question is super important. Being able to try to talk about projects that you owned or were heavily involved in, and using terms that relate to you, because sometimes in interviews we've noticed recently, people like to use we and like to demonstrate team building and all that, and that's great, but it just doesn't provide what you as a person actually did on that project. So being able to talk about what you were heavily involved in is important, and obviously making sure that they're related closely to that job description. And of course, being able to come prepared with those roadblocks ready to go, something similar to what they might be facing right now and how you were able to handle it. And then always come prepared with some questions. I'm sure as research, you'll probably have a million questions, kind of try to narrow them down into what you think is really going to be important and relevant to you considering that role. Super important. Yeah, and these are just basic tips, especially with interviewing remotely. Have that resume printed out and ready to go. We've also noticed that people have been just kind of trying to scramble through, going through different tabs, leaving the Zoom or WebEx and kind of trying to get to the resume. But having it printed out kind of gets rid of that whole issue. Having your computer charged up and ready to go. Sounds so simple, but it would really, I would hate to see somebody lose an opportunity just because their computer wasn't charged up. Then easy stuff like tidying up the background, making sure that everything looks clean, eliminating background noise, whether if you have kids, scheduling a play date or letting the dogs outside definitely can help with that. Dressing professionally, sometimes sweatpants will work, but you don't want to get caught wearing sweatpants. Definitely want to be dressed professionally from the waist up. And then log on early, make sure that your audio is working, your video is working. If you're having trouble connecting your webcam, you can get that all settled before the interview will start. Super important. And then resumes, Kelly already kind of touched on this, but I'll go into some more detail into what that should look like. Resumes, I mean, at first glance, a hiring manager will typically look at a resume for only about 6 seconds. So making sure that experience that is relevant is at the top and easy to read through. Also be explicit in that experience, because that first person who looks at that resume might not be a technical person. It might be somebody within HR who's looking for those buzzwords like we were talking about before, and whatever that automated system might be that we're using to search for resumes may also be that same way. Career Builder also found out that 75% of HR managers have found lies on resumes. Don't lie on a resume. Definitely an important part because you can get caught. And then dates of employment, that's another thing that people might not even realize about. Just trying to make sure that's accurate, because that could lead to disqualification for a role if you're a month or so off. And then what hiring managers are looking for in there. Obviously, a strong summary of what you do and what you've done. What a resume is, but really kind of trying to summarize everything that you've done and how it is relevant to what they need. If you've worked in the same industry, I know healthcare is big in the upstate, going through and being able to kind of demonstrate how you've worked within that industry sector is really important. And then the value, again, that you brought to the team, not we brought to the team, is super important there. Continuous employment, we get it. People do come out of work from time to time, whether that be a family emergency or COVID or whatever that looks like. But being able to kind of just go through the resume and address any big gaps in there. If you were getting a certification during that time or whatever you might have been doing is super important there. Relevant certifications, if you're going for, we've seen a lot more in the cloud security space. If you have a cloud certification, definitely make that front and center so they can see that. And then employer brand awareness, being able to go through and do your research on the company. And if they're on the cutting edge, being able to kind of figure out, okay, if they're working with these cutting edge technologies, I have to make sure that that's relevant and on my resume. Does anybody have any questions? Check the chat.
Yep. So that was, thanks, Mike. But yeah, that was kind of wraps up what we have for y'all today. I can't see in the chat right now because I'm presenting, but it does seem to be lighting up. If there are any questions y'all want to touch on.
Yeah,
Here
well,
is our contact information.
Yeah, one of the things we're talking about in the chat is the outrageous pricing for SANS classes, even though, of course, those those certifications seem to be money. So it's great to have them, and if you especially can have a company pay for you to go rather than having to pay for them out of pocket. Do you see a lot of demand for SAN certs? And are there any of them that
I don't think I have seen that locally. I would be curious, kind of across the board, across the country, what that looks like. Now that y'all bring that up, because you're right, I didn't see too many of those on the list.
Yeah. I think what I always hear is it's always the CISSP is kind of still the one that everybody looks to. Just to, even if, and I think maybe even you and I had this conversation one day about a lot of companies that, you know, they're looking for someone with a CISP and, you know, at least 3 years of experience in the field, or
Yeah.
and then they want to pay you $60,000, and I don't know if that's have things kind of evened out a little bit more, or is it, do you still see those instances and you have to educate the hiring managers that?
I think we are seeing the salaries level out a little bit locally, and companies around here are coming to terms with the price tag associated with someone with the experience. So I've definitely seen that come around a little bit. I think people are understanding everything that comes with the CISSP a little bit better nowadays, which is comforting, except for, to Charlie's point, there are some entry-level roles that ask for that, but.
Yeah, which, right. I think
Doesn't exist.
They just don't understand what they're really,
Yeah.
what they're looking for or asking for, and they have to educate
Mhm.
them on what is realistic and what makes sense.
Mhm.
Do you guys have any top tips for, you know, students that are looking at breaking into IT security? So we got, you know, some folks, you know, from, of course, Greenville Tech and Clemson and Upstate USC typically in the meetings, and so that's, I definitely have my list. But you guys have any of your top tips and tricks for students?
Yeah, I think networking is key. So obviously continuing to coming to these, but also making the most out of them. So I know we used to go through the introductions, but when we were in person, but like, hey, if you had the opportunity, if you heard, oh, Mike, he works at Floor, I would love to work at Floor, like taking the initiative to reach out and making the most out of the networking events instead of just attending. And checking off the box, I think, is one of the biggest things that I could encourage. And I think leveraging LinkedIn, connecting, reaching out, trying to make connections in that way. If you know, hey, I want to get into healthcare security, doing a quick search, who works at Prisma and information security, reaching out, trying to get an introduction there and just start having that conversation, I think is definitely something to set you apart. So I don't know if Logan or Mike have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, be patient with it. I mean, your first job might not be exactly what you want to do with your career, but it's helping you get in that door and get that experience that will be needed to eventually get there.
Yep, I think that's a good point too.
I think that covers everything I had on my list. Anybody else have any other questions?
Well, yeah, and if you do, like I said, if you wanted more specific information around kind of the path you want to go down, or like, hey, help me understand, am I, from a salary perspective, what's the market look like in this specific realm, definitely reach out. We'll be happy to talk through that with you, or if you want to talk through your resume specifically, or anything like that, we're definitely open to help.
Okay, sounds great. Well,
Thanks
I appreciate
for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Also, thanks to Kelly and Logan and Michael for coming in and sharing with everybody. And definitely feel free to reach out to the TekSystems team if you guys have any questions, hiring or hopefully not firing, but hiring or looking at obtaining a job or position. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys for coming and sharing with the group, and thanks for everybody for attending. So enjoy the rest of January. Hopefully the rest will look a little bit better than the start, and we'll see you guys next month with the gentleman who's the CISO for Greenville County Schools. All right, so stay safe out there, and see you guys then. All right, take
Thanks,
care.
Mike.
Is there-
You're right. Hey
Thanks, Mike.
guys.